Hello and welcome to the channel. For today's tutorial, I'll be drafting a corset for plus size with big busts and also the accurate measurement for your dart intake. So let's start. So going over to my pattern paper, I have drawn out the basic measurements. So I placed my tape and I marked my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust and shoulder to waistline. So the shoulder to bust I'm working with is 11.5. The under bust is 15.5, and I used where my pattern paper stopped as the waist. So this particular pattern is for a plus size. So the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the neckline, which is the standard neckline of 3 by 3 inches. I'm going to mark, place my French curve, and I'm going to connect. So from there I'm going to draw the neckline of this corset pattern, and this is what I have. So what I'll do is to place my tape and I'm going to mark the shoulder circumference. So if you're attaching a sleeve, you'll be adding half to this pattern. So the shoulder circumference I'm working for on this pattern is 16 inches divided by 2. I have 8, and I'm going to come down by 1 inch, and from that point I'll place my tape, connect to the neckline to draw the shoulder slant. So from the shoulder slope I'm going to get the chest line, and to get your chest line is your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to mark. So I'm going to make sure whatever I have on the shoulder, that is what I have on this place. So from that part, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler and I'm going to draw out a straight line, which is my chest line. So I'm going to write this as CL, meaning chest line, and the next step I'm going to take is to place my ruler and I'm going to connect those lines together. So after connecting the line, the next step I'm going to take is to divide my chest line into 2. So I'm just going to fold my tape to get the middle of the armhole, and I'm going to mark. So after marking, I'm going to go in by ½ inch from that point. So after going in by ½ inch, I'm going to place my tape at my chest line and I'm going to get my bust, the bust circumference I'm working with, divided by 4, and I'm going to mark. So the bust I'm working with is size 42, so you can work with size 42, 45, 46 and above, depending on what your bust is. So I'm going to place the French curve and I'm going to connect it from the upper part down to that ½ inch I came in with and down to the chest line. After drawing, this is what I have, and the next step I'm going to take is to draw it out with my marker. After drawing it out with my marker, the next step is to mark my dart intake. So for my dart intake, I'm going to mark the nipple to nipple divided by 2. So the nipple to nipple I'm working with is 8.5 divided by 2. I have 4.25, and I'm just going to go ahead to mark it at the bust line, at the under bust, and at the chest line. The next thing I'm going to do is to place my ruler and I'm going to connect all those lines that I have marked. So after connecting the line, we'll be moving over to the next step. For the dart intake I'm going to take for this is 3 inches, which is 1.5 inches on both sides. But if it's a normal corset, just like for a normal size, I can just go ahead to mark 2 inches dart, meaning 1 inch on both sides of the dart. So what I'm going to do is to place my tape and I'm going to mark 1.5 inches at both sides at my under bust and go down to my waist, and I'm going to mark 1.5 inches at both sides. Next, I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to connect, drawing a straight line. So you can go ahead to measure what you have from your bust to your under bust, and you're going to take it round. So this will serve as a guide in case you're a beginner and you might be confused at some point, but it's not really necessary. And meanwhile, because I'm using a pencil, it was not really visible on this pattern. So next step, what you're going to take is to connect from your under bust down to your waistline, and to do that I'm going to place my French curve touching my bust point down to my under bust, and I'm going to flip it to the other side, and I will repeat the same process here again. So after marking that, I'm just going to place my tape at my chest line and I'm going to mark 2 inches. So this totally depends if you want to reveal your cleavage or not. So, or you can just place your tape at the shoulder and then determine where you want your corset to start. So you can just start at 6.5 inches or 7 inches, or you can as well use 6 inches if you don't want to reveal your cleavage. Now I'm going to place my ruler at that 2 inches I went up at my chest line. I will be extending my line to that part. Now is to draw the neckline of the corset. So next is to mark the dart intake of this part. So to do that, you're not just going to mark your normal 1 inch on both sides. You're actually going to calculate this. So what you're going to do is your bust circumference minus your under bust. So the bust I'm working with is size 42 minus under bust of 37, and I have 5 inches left. So right, that 5 inches, I'm going to divide it into 2 inches. Dividing it into 2 inches, I have 2.5 inches. So from that mark at the center, I'm going to measure 2.5 inches this way, and this is my mark. So for the dart intake for the other side, what you're going to do is that 2.5 inches, you're going to divide it into 2 again. If you divide it into 2, you're going to have 1.25 inches, and you're going to place your tape and you're going to mark inwards. So next you're going to be connecting for your darts. Next you're going to place your ruler or French curve and you're going to connect it from that point down to your bust point. And when you're connecting, make sure you don't have a sharp edge. After connecting, we are going to connect also for the other side, and I'm going to place my ruler or French curve at that point, and I'm going to connect down to the bust point. So this is what I have right now. So next is to determine the neckline, and at the chest line I'll just use what I have at the chest line. I will go in by ½ inch. You can as well go down by ½ inch if you want it to be more deeper, but I'm just going to leave it at my chest line. I'll come in by ½ inch. So at that ½ inch I came in with, I'm going to place my French curve and I'm going to connect from that point down to the under bust at the center part of my corset. So with this, my cup is ready with this side, and the next thing I'm going to do is to connect it down to the dart intake at the center. So the neckline totally depends on you or whatever you want to create. Moving over to the side, so what I have from my armhole curve to my bust circumference divided by 4, I'm going to divide into 2 and I will mark. So from that point, I'm going to place my French curve connecting down to my under bust. So you can decide to go down by ½ inch at the chest line just to make your armhole a bit free, but I'm just going to leave it at the chest line. Now is to connect from that point down to the chest line. So I'm going to take my French curve and I'll place and I'll connect it right back to my chest line. So I'll connect first with my pencil. In case I have any error by this side, I'm going to adjust it. But before going any further, what I'm going to do is to blend my neckline to make sure it meets. This is very important. So I'm going to take my pattern and I will fold it over this way just to check if it meets. So the 2 points meet. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and outline with my marker. And I'm going to take my French curve to draw the neckline. This is for people that want to sew a corset with a yoke. So the upper part will serve as your yoke. So what I will do is to mark out my dart area so that you will not get confused with the part that you're meant to cut and the part you're not meant to cut. I'll go ahead and label the upper part as yoke for this dress. Next, I'll be inserting my measurement at my bust line. I'm going to insert my bust circumference divided by 4 inches, and I'll go ahead to mark. So after doing that, what I'm going to do is to mark the dart intake I have. So you can go ahead to mark it on the chest line or take whatever you have at the upper part. So I'll go ahead and I will replace the dart intake. So I'm just going to add ½ inch for seam or sewing allowance. You can add more to yours. You can use 1.52 inches and it's okay. So I'll just extend my chest line. So whatever I have at the bust is what I'm going to have at the chest line. So I'm just going to extend that line this way. So I'm going to place my tape and I will mark my under bust circumference divided by 4. Go ahead, mark this dart intake, and I'm going to replace it. Then I'll just go ahead to mark ½ inch for my ease or sewing allowance. So note, this is not constant. You can add more if you want. So down to my waistline, I'm going to insert the waist circumference divided by 4. After marking the waist circumference divided by 4, what I'm going to do is to take the dart intake of 3 inches and I'm going to replace it, and I will go ahead to add ½ inch. Now I'm going to connect from the bust down to the under bust line. From the under bust line, I'm going to go ahead to mark the waistline. So this is what I have for my front pattern, and I'll go ahead to label my cup as A and here as B, and I'll label here as center and label the other one as side. So after this, I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. So at this point, if you find my tutorial very interesting and educative, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and leave your comment at the comment section. So after cutting out my front pattern, this is what it is looking like, and we'll be heading over to draft the back pattern. So for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark out all my basic measurements just like I did in the front, and I just use my basic neckline for the back. So this is the same process I use in marking the front, and for this pattern it has no zip. You're going to make use of a lacing bar. So the next step is to mark your dart intake, but before I do that, I'm just going to draw a straight line as my chest line, and I'm going to use that as my yoke for the back. Next is to mark the dart intake, and I will mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. I will mark at the waistline, at the under bust, at the bust line, and at the chest line. So after doing that, I'm just going to draw a straight line to connect it. So for the dart intake for the back, I'm just going to mark 0.75 inches at both sides. So I'll be making use of a 1.5 inch dart at the back. Normally for a normal size, you're just going to make use of 1 inch, meaning ½ inch at both sides, but this you're going to mark 0.75 at both sides, giving you 1.5 inches. So from that point, I'm going to place my ruler, and at the bust line, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. Then after marking that point, I'm just going to place my ruler and I'll connect it down to my bust point. After connecting my dart, this is what I have. Then next, I'm going to insert my body measurement. At the bust, I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to mark and go ahead to add ½ inch for sewing or ease. So you can go ahead to mark the allowance you need. And at the under bust, I'm going to mark the under bust circumference divided by 4. After marking that, I'll go ahead to measure the dart I have at the under bust, and I'll replace it and go ahead to mark ½ inch. So after marking that, I'm going to go ahead to mark my waist circumference. So I'll go ahead to measure the dart intake plus ½ inch, and I'll mark it at once. And after doing that, I'm just going to connect from the bust to the chest line, and from the bust down to the under bust and down to the waist line. So this is what I have. This is what my pattern is looking like. So for the lacing bar area, you're going to determine the amount of space you want at your back. So I'll just go ahead to mark 1.5 inches. You can mark 2 inches if you want. So after marking that, I'm going to place my ruler, and I will connect, drawing a straight line. I'll go ahead to make a dot to indicate the lacing bar area of this dress, and after that I'll go ahead to shade off the dart so that you will not mistake it for the pattern. The upper part, I'm just going to mark 1 inch or half depending on what you want, and I'm going to connect it from that line down to the dart line at the back. So this is what my back pattern looks like, and I'll go ahead to mark the upper part as yoke. Then I'm going to label this as side 1, but I mistakenly wrote center. I misplaced the labeling, but that shouldn't be an issue. So with this, I'm going to cut out my pattern, and we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and see you in our next video.